The rain hit the marble steps before I did. Then my knees found them, and then the ring my father used to wear found the gutter grate, bouncing once, twice, before I could close my fingers around empty air. My name is Wren Ashford. I was 26 years old, and in the space of 4 hours I had lost a father, a home, and every dollar my name had ever been allowed to touch. To understand how I came to own the very doors that slammed shut on me that night, I have to go back 4 hours to the reading of a dead man's will. Augustine Calloway had raised me from the age of 7 in a house with 60 rooms and one daughter who was never, not once, allowed to forget that I wasn't his. I did his company's real books in the evenings, while his actual heir did photo shoots for the shipping trade magazines. Nobody signed my name to any of it. I kept the receipts anyway. That has always been my answer to a world that refuses to see me. I keep receipts. Subscribe to the channel, and let's go back to the night the storm started. The lawyer's voice was still dry with legal formality when Marisol Calloway stood up so fast her chair cracked against the parquet. 12 minutes earlier, Augustine's will had named his adopted daughter, Omega, invisible, unpaid, as financial trustee of Calloway Maritime and Textile, with a 9% stake attached. Marisol's face went the color of old paper. "This is a joke," she said, and the room, 20 relatives and lawyers deep, went perfectly silent to listen to her decide it wasn't. She had security at the door before the lawyer finished reading the codicil. 2 men. Neither of them looked at me on the way out, which was, I would think later, its own kind of mercy. "You will not touch a single share of what my father built," Marisol said, close enough that I could smell the wine on her breath, and under it the burnt copper anger that alphas carry when they've decided cruelty is efficient. "You are staff's daughter playing house in a name you were never given. Get out of my house." "It's not your house yet," I said. "The will hasn't been probated." "It is tonight." She nodded once, and the doors of the house I had lived in for 19 years opened onto a downpour, and 2 men who had carried my birthday cakes as children now carried me, by the arms, not gently, down 11 marble steps into it. The chain on my mother's thimble snapped somewhere around the 4th step. I heard it before I felt it, a small metallic protest lost under the rain, and I twisted hard enough that one of the men swore and let go, and I went down on both knees, reaching for a piece of brass no bigger than a fingernail, my mother's whole inheritance to me, the only thing of Elena Ashford's I had left since she died stitching curtains for a family that never learned to spell her name correctly. I didn't find it. Marisol's voice found me instead. From the top of the steps, dry now, amused now, the fury banked into something worse. "By morning your accounts will be frozen. By next week there will be a very convincing paper trail showing you embezzled from a dying man who trusted you. Nobody will ever hire an Omega accountant who stole from her own family. You will disappear, Wren, the way you always should have." She was not wrong about the accounts. She was not wrong about the paper trail either. Denny Ruiz, the company's junior accountant, had been altering entries under her direction for 6 days by the time I understood what was happening to me. But she was wrong about the last part. I did not disappear. I stood in the rain outside a house I had scrubbed floors in as a girl of 11 because no one else would, my knees bleeding, my mother's thimble lost in a storm drain, and I made myself a promise instead of a plan, because I did not have a plan yet. The promise was simple. Someday, the woman who threw me into this rain would need something from me, and I would still keep every receipt from tonight to remind myself why I said no. I did not know yet that 410 days later, I would be sitting across a boardroom table from a woman named Dahlia Voss, watching her buy, 1 silent quarter at a time, the exact company that had just thrown me down its steps. I did not know her yet at all. I only knew, standing in that gutter with 60 rooms and 19 years behind me, that the rain was cold, that my hands were shaking, and that somewhere close an idling black car had its headlights on and had been sitting there, engine running, for longer than felt like coincidence. I did not look at the car. I had nowhere to go and $11 in a checking account that would freeze by midnight, and I was not in the business, that night, of believing in rescue. I walked, 3 blocks, then 6, until my shoes filled with water and the house behind me was only a smear of gold light through rain. I found a shelter that took walk-ins on Cascade Street and slept 4 hours on a cot with my knees still bleeding through my stockings, and in the morning I did the only thing I knew how to do. I opened a laptop I had bought used for $40 2 years earlier, and I applied for every forensic accounting position within 30 miles, because numbers were the one language that had never once lied to me, and I intended to make them earn their keep. Pruitt and Klein forensic auditors hired me 11 days later on a trial basis, mostly because the managing partner, a tired man named Halvorsen, needed someone willing to work a case nobody else wanted, a mid-sized shipping insurer whose books didn't add up by exactly the amount that made everyone else's eyes glaze over. I took one look at the ledger and found the discrepancy in 40 minutes. It took the firm's senior auditor 3 weeks to find nothing at all. "How?" Halvorsen said, staring at my marked-up spreadsheet like it had insulted him personally. "I count everything twice," I said. "It's not a gift. It's a habit that used to keep me employed for free." He didn't ask what that meant. 3 days later, he put me on the Kessler shipping fraud case, the firm's biggest client that quarter, and told me to sit in on the client meeting and say nothing unless asked. I sat in the back of a glass conference room on the 19th floor of a building I'd never had reason to enter, and I watched 6 executives argue in circles about a $14 million shortfall none of them could explain, and I counted the whole time, because that is what I do when I am frightened, and I was, a little, in rooms like that one now. Halvorsen finally turned to me 40 minutes in, more out of desperation than confidence. "Ashford, anything. The shortfall isn't 14 million, I said. "It's 14.2, and it's not theft. It's 3 shell subcontractors billing the same shipment under different names, routed through a clearing account your CFO approved 11 times without reading past the signature line." I slid a single page across the table, 3 columns, 1 red circle. The pattern repeats every 41 days. That's not carelessness. Someone built it on purpose. The room went the particular kind of silent that happens when the smallest person in it has just been the only one telling the truth. The CFO's face drained of color, and at the head of the table, in a charcoal suit with no tie, and a watch worth more than my first apartment, a woman I did not yet know was watching me with an attention so total it felt, absurdly, like weather changing. She did not introduce herself. She said 4 words. "Send me her file." Then she stood, and the room stood with her, the way rooms do for people who own the air in them, and she left, and it was only after the glass door swung shut behind her that Halvorsen exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "Do you know who that was?" he asked me. I didn't. I would learn her name within the week. Dahlia Voss, principal of Ossery Holdings, a private firm so quiet about its own dealings that the business papers had taken to calling her the Vault of Ossery Row, because nothing that went in ever seemed to come back out, and no one, in 11 years of trying, had gotten her to give an interview. I would also learn, though not for a long while yet, that Ossery Holdings had spent the last 410 days quietly acquiring distressed debt from 3 different shipping insurers whose losses traced, every single time back to Callaway Maritime and Textile. I did not know that yet. I only knew that when she left the room, it smelled faintly of black pepper and wet slate, cold and sharp and strange, and that some unwatched part of me had cataloged it the way I cataloged everything, carefully, completely, and against my will. The email came 4 days later, unsigned except for a company seal I didn't recognize, offering me a contract position auditing Ossery Holdings' acquisitions division at triple what Pruitt and Klein paid me. Halvorsen told me to take it before I'd finished reading the second line. "Nobody says no to the vault," he said. "Nobody's ever had the chance. She doesn't recruit. She annexes." I took it. I told myself it was the money, and the money was real, and it was also not the whole truth. Because some part of me, the part that still, 410 days later, dreamed of 11 marble steps and rain, wanted very badly to know why a woman who owned half the port had looked at my one page of red circled numbers like it was the first honest thing anyone had shown her in years. The Ossery building had no sign on the street, only a brass number, and a doorman who knew my name before I gave it, which unsettled me exactly as much as it was meant to. The floors were the kind of quiet that costs more than shouting. My new office had a river view I couldn't have afforded to look at from any other angle, and a note on the desk in handwriting so precise it looked typed: "Start with the Callaway file. Ask no questions until you have answers of your own." I sat down, opened the file, and found my own former life staring back at me in a stranger's careful blue ink. 3 years of Callaway Maritime ledgers, flagged, cross-referenced, and annotated in the margins with a single recurring notation that made my stomach drop before my mind caught up to why. DR. Pattern match. Kessler case. Denny Ruiz, the same forger. The same pattern. Someone at Ossery Holdings had been tracking the exact fraud that had been used to frame me for months, long before I'd ever walked through this building's unmarked door, and had left the file for me to find, specifically on my first morning, with a note that read like it already knew who I used to be. I did not sleep that night. I read every page twice, the way I read everything, and on the 40th page, I found a wire transfer dated the same week I'd been thrown down 11 marble steps, Ossery Holdings, acquiring, at a steep and deliberate premium, 60% of a shell company's defaulted paper that traced, 4 transactions later, directly back to my own frozen accounts. Someone had bought back my debt the same week Marisol froze it. I had a name for that someone now, and a face, and a scent I couldn't stop thinking about, and no earthly idea yet what any of it meant, except that the vault of Ossery Row did not annex people by accident, and she had annexed me the same week I lost everything. And I did not yet know if that made her a rescuer or a debt collector who simply hadn't sent the invoice. The apartment Ossery Holdings arranged for me had floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who called me Miss Ashford like it was a title I'd earned instead of one I'd stumbled into. It was 4 blocks from the office and 40 minutes, by cab, from the shelter cot I'd slept on 11 days before I signed the contract. I stood in the kitchen my first night there and counted the cabinets. 9, because counting things was still the only way I knew to keep a room from tilting. Priya Nakamura found me like that on my 3rd day, standing in the archive room at 2 a.m. with the Callaway file spread across 4 tables, and did not ask why. She introduced herself as chief of staff, called me Ashford the same clipped way Halvorsen had, and set a paper cup of coffee at my elbow without comment. It took me a week to learn her actual name was Ose. Priya had been a deliberate misdirection, a small test she ran on every new hire to see who corrected her and who didn't. I corrected her on day 4. She looked, briefly, almost impressed. "You've been here 15 years, I said, not quite a question. 16. Osai didn't look up from the folder she was reading. In 16 years, I have watched her outbid a sovereign fund, sit through a 9-hour hostile takeover without blinking, and turn down 3 merger offers that would have doubled the firm's holdings because she didn't like how the other side treated their support staff. I have never once seen her leave a client meeting to personally email a junior auditor's file to acquisitions. A pause, exact and deliberate. You should know that means something. She won't tell you what. I asked her then the question I'd been circling for a week. Why me? Ask her. Osei closed the folder. I only keep her calendar. I don't keep her reasons. I did not ask her, not yet. Instead, I did the thing I was good at. I worked. I traced the Callaway pattern back 18 months, cross-referenced it against 3 subsidiary insurers, and built, plank by careful plank, a case that Denny Ruiz had been forging entries at Marisol's direction since well before Augustine's death, not after it, which meant the theft they'd pinned on me had likely started while the man who'd raised me was still alive to be lied to in his own house. Dahlia found me in the archive room the night I finished the first full draft. I hadn't heard the door. I only knew she'd arrived because the room's temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees and the air went sharp with black pepper and wet slate, and every hair on my arms stood up before I'd consciously registered a sound. "You're still here," she said. Not a greeting, a fact, stated the way she seemed to state everything, like weather she'd already accounted for. "So are you." I didn't look up from the spreadsheet. It's 2 a.m. I don't sleep well in this building. A pause. I don't sleep well anywhere, if we're being accurate. I looked up at that, because it was the first unguarded thing I had heard her say in 3 weeks of working 11 floors beneath her office. She was standing in the doorway in a coat instead of the charcoal suit, hair down instead of pinned, and for one unshielded second, she looked less like a headline and more like a woman who had been walking the halls of her own company, because the alternative was an empty apartment. "Why did you buy my debt the week I lost everything?" I asked her. I hadn't planned to. The question simply arrived, the way true questions do when you've been carrying them too long to keep carrying them politely. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer immediately either. She crossed the room, looked down at the spreadsheet I'd built, 18 months of fraud laid out in red and blue ink, a case that would end a family empire, and something in her face went very still. Because I read the Kessler file the same week my analysts flagged a pattern in Callaway's insurance claims, she said, and because the pattern matched a name I'd heard exactly once before, at a dinner I wasn't invited to attend but attended anyway, where a woman I'd never met was described by her own stepsister as Staff's daughter, who'd disappear the way she always should have. She looked at me directly then, and her voice, when it came, had dropped into something quieter than her boardroom register, something almost rough at the edges. "I don't collect strays, Ren. I don't do sentiment as a business model. But I have spent 11 years watching people like Marisol Callaway throw away the only competent person in the room because competence, in an omega, frightens them more than fraud does. I bought your debt because I could, and because it was correct, and because," she stopped. "And because," I said. "And because it made me angry in a way very little makes me angry anymore." A ghost of something crossed her mouth, not quite a smile. "That should concern you more than it concerns me." It did not concern me. It should have. Instead, I stood in an archive room at 2 a.m, with a stranger's fury on my behalf sitting in my chest like a struck match, and I thought, not for the first time, and very much against my better judgment, that I would very much like to know what black pepper and wet slate smelled like from closer than 4 feet away. I did not act on it. Not that night. That night I only said, "Thank you for the file," and she only said, "Thank you for finishing it faster than my whole legal team." And she left, and the room went warm again, the way rooms do when weather passes through and moves on. And I sat alone with my case and my pulse, doing something I refused to name until considerably later. The gala came 11 days after that, the Maritime Trust Foundation's annual dinner, the one event on the city's calendar where every shipping family in the port, including the one that had raised and discarded me, occupied the same ballroom for 4 hours without bloodshed. Historically, Osei told me attendance was mandatory for senior acquisition staff. I told her I would rather resign. She told me, not unkindly, that resigning would mean Marisol Calloway won a fight I hadn't even told her I was fighting, and that Dahlia had specifically requested my presence, and that the vault of Ossery Row did not specifically request things twice. I wore, that night, the first dress I had bought with money that was entirely and legally my own, not shame-colored, not borrowed, not handed down from a stepsister's discard pile the way every good dress of my childhood had been. Deep green, structured at the shoulders, the kind of garment that made a person stand differently inside it. I looked at myself in the mirror of the ossuary arranged apartment and did not recognize the woman looking back. And then I did, all at once, and it startled me enough that I had to sit down on the edge of the bed for a full minute before I could leave. Marisol saw me the moment I walked in. I watched it land on her face, first confusion, then recognition, then something closer to fear than I had ever seen her wear in 19 years of watching her wear everything else. She crossed the ballroom floor in 6 precise steps, wineglass in hand, voice-pitched for an audience. "You have some nerve," she said, "showing your face at an event my family funds. Your father funded it," I said. "You just haven't gotten around to renaming everything with your face on it yet." A ripple of something moved through the small circle around us, not quite laughter, but close enough that Marisol's jaw tightened. "Careful," she said. "Accusations like that tend to boomerang. Ask Denny Ruiz how well embezzlement charges have gone for people who cross me. I don't need to ask him." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I've read his handwriting so many times this month I could forge it better than he can." Her wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. Before she could answer, the air beside me changed, colder, sharper, black pepper and wet slate arriving like a door opening onto winter, and Dahlia Voss stepped into the circle with the specific stillness of a woman who has decided, calmly, exactly how the next 90 seconds will go. "Miss Calloway," Dahlia's voice carried without rising. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm the majority creditor on your family's outstanding maritime insurance obligations. $14.2 million, if my analysts' numbers hold, which they generally do." A pause, precisely timed. "I understand you know my head of forensic acquisitions rather well already." Marisol's face went the color of old paper for the second time in 421 days. "You," she said, and could not seem to finish the sentence. "Me," Dahlia agreed. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." She turned to me, and something in her expression softened by exactly 1 degree, private and brief, and only for me to see. "Walk with me." We stood on the terrace afterward, the harbor lights strung out below us like something spilled and glittering, and I was still shaking slightly. The particular shake that comes after you've stood your ground and only realized how much it cost you once the ground stopped moving. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I wanted to." She was watching the water, not me, which made it easier, I think, for both of us to say true things. "I have spent 11 years building a company specifically so that I would never again have to watch someone She stopped herself, visibly, the way a person stops before a door they aren't sure they're allowed to open. so that I would never have to watch it happen without the power to stop it. "Someone you," I said. I did not let her off the hook. "Finish it." She turned to look at me then, fully, the harbor light catching the sharp line of her jaw, and for a moment the vault of Ossuary Row looked less like a headline and more like a woman standing at the edge of something she had spent a very long time refusing to fall into. Someone I have watched work 11-hour days without complaint, catch a $14 million fraud in 40 minutes that my entire legal department missed for a year, and stand in front of the woman who threw her into the rain without once raising her voice. Her jaw tightened. "I don't do this, Ren. I haven't wanted this in longer than you've been alive in this city." "Wanted what?" I said, though I already knew, and some reckless part of me wanted to hear her say it anyway. "You, no hesitation this time. I wanted you the first time you slid one page across a conference table and told 6 executives the truth they'd paid a fortune not to hear. The wind off the harbor smelled like salt and diesel, and underneath it, like her, cold stone and black pepper, and beneath both of those things, something warmer I hadn't caught before, something that might have been the first honest thing she'd let show in years." I stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off her despite the night air, close enough that some old animal part of me registered her scent shifting, warming, the way scent does when an alpha stops guarding it. "Tell me to stop," I said, "and I will." "Don't stop." Her voice had gone rough. "Ask me with your words what you want, and I'll give it to you, but I need to hear you say it. I've spent too long taking things by force in every other part of my life. I won't take this." "I want you to kiss me," I said, "before I lose my nerve and pretend I came out here for the view." She laughed, a short, surprised sound, the first genuinely unguarded thing I'd heard from her, and then she kissed me, careful at first, restrained in a way that told me exactly how much control she was spending to keep it that way, and I understood, standing there with the whole glittering port spread out below us, that restraint was the most honest thing she had ever shown me. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, and for one long moment neither of us said anything at all, and the silence was the warmest thing that had happened to me in 421 days. "This isn't going to be simple," I said finally. "Marisol doesn't lose gracefully." "Neither do I," Dahlia said. "But unlike her, I only fight fights I intend to finish." 3 weeks passed in the strange, suspended quiet of something new being built carefully, brick by careful brick, between 2 people who had both spent their lives learning not to trust rooms with soft lighting. I moved through Ossuary Holdings' floors differently now. Osai's clipped nods had warmed into something like genuine welcome, and twice I found, waiting on my desk in the morning, a paper cup of chamomile tea with exactly the wrong amount of honey stirred in, too much, the way I liked it and had mentioned exactly once, in passing, weeks before. I never asked who left it. I already knew. The attack came on a Tuesday at 11:52 at night in the parking structure beneath the Ossuary building. I had stayed late, finishing the last cross-reference on the Ruiz forgeries, and I was 3 steps from my car when a man I didn't recognize stepped out of the shadow between 2 support columns and told me, calmly, that Miss Calloway would very much like her family's private ledgers returned before I did something with them I couldn't take back. I did the only thing my body knew to do. I ran. I made it 11 feet before he caught my arm hard enough to bruise, and I was still fighting to break free when the structure's far door slammed open, and Dahlia crossed 40 feet of concrete faster than I had ever seen a person move, and put herself, without a single second of hesitation, between me and a man twice her size. He swung once. She took it across the shoulder rather than let it land on me, and the sound it made, a wet, terrible crack of impact, is a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. Security arrived within seconds after that, summoned by Osei, who had apparently been watching the structure's feed since the moment I badged out and hadn't liked what she saw. The man ran. Dahlia did not chase him. She turned instead, immediately, to me, one hand already reaching for my face, checking for injury with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the violence still radiating off her. "I'm fine," I said. My voice wasn't steady. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." It was not nothing. Her shoulder was already swelling beneath her torn shirt, and beneath the black pepper and wet slate I could smell copper now, sharp and wrong, and something in my chest cracked open at the wrongness of it in a way 424 days of my own suffering never had. "You took a hit that was meant for me," I said. "I would take considerably worse than that." She said it simply, without performance, the way she said everything that mattered. "I told you I don't fight fights I don't intend to finish. That includes this one." I brought her home myself. Instead of letting Osei call a car, my apartment was closer, and I was not, that night, willing to let her out of my sight. I cleaned the cut above her collarbone with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, and she let me. Sitting very still on the edge of my bathroom counter with her shirt half off and her guard, for the first time since I'd met her, entirely down. "You have scars," I said. There were 3, old and pale, catalogued the way I catalogued everything without meaning to, one along her ribs, one at her hairline, one across the back of her left hand. "I have a great many things," she said. "Most of them predate you. Tell me about the one on your hand." She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then her name was Celeste. We were bonded for 3 years, back before I understood the difference between loyalty and leverage. She sold information about an acquisition to a rival firm for enough money to disappear with someone else, and the deal collapsed publicly enough that it nearly took the company with it. I found out from a reporter before I found out from her. The scar is from the wall I put my hand through the night I confirmed it was true. Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone very old and very tired. "My mother built this company on the principle that trust is a liability with no upside. I spent 11 years agreeing with her. Because agreeing with her was easier than admitting she might have taught me the wrong lesson from the right pain. She was wrong," I said. "I know that now." Dahlia looked at me, and there was nothing guarded left in her face at all. I didn't know it until a woman with a marked-up spreadsheet walked into my boardroom and told 6 executives the truth without once checking whether they wanted to hear it. Control was never the same thing as strength. I confused them for 11 years because confusing them meant I never had to be the person standing in a parking structure taking a punch meant for someone I couldn't bear to lose. She reached for my hand, careful, deliberate, the same restraint she'd shown on the terrace. "I love you. I have loved you since a page of red circled numbers, and I did not say it sooner, because saying it meant admitting I was no longer in control of anything, and I find, now that I've said it, that I don't mind nearly as much as I thought I would." I kissed her before I could talk myself out of it, careful of the bruise, careful of everything except the 2 of us, and the room filled slowly with a warmth I hadn't smelled from her before. Something under the black pepper and wet slate that I would only later learn was what her scent did when every guard came all the way down. We didn't go further that night. She held me instead, careful of her shoulder, and I fell asleep counting her heartbeat instead of gutter drains for the first time in 424 days, and it was, without exaggeration, the best sleep I had gotten since before the rain. The smear campaign broke 6 days later, timed with a precision that told me exactly whose hand was behind it. A financial gossip site ran the story first, anonymous sourcing, unverifiable quotes, alleging that Ossery Holdings' reclusive owner had installed her mistress in a fabricated executive role to launder a personal vendetta against a respected maritime family. By noon, it had 3 follow-up pieces. By evening, Ossery's board had called an emergency session, and 2 of the 7 members were openly questioning whether Dahlia's judgment could be trusted with a merger of this size. I sat in Osai's office and watched Dahlia's face on the video call go progressively, dangerously still, the way weather goes still right before it turns. "This is Marisol," I said. "She's not attacking the company. She's attacking me, through you, because she knows it's the one angle that could actually hurt you." "It's working," Osai said grimly, scrolling a market ticker that had dropped 4 points since morning. Worse arrived that night. Josie Marlowe, my only friend left from the old life at Pruitt and Klein, called me in tears. 2 men had followed her from the office, asked pointed questions about my whereabouts and my access to Calloway's old files, and left only when a passing security patrol turned the corner. Marisol had stopped fighting me directly. She had started fighting everyone around me instead, and the message underneath it was unmistakable: disappear quietly, or watch everyone you love pay the difference. I found Dahlia on the Ossery Terrace an hour before midnight, coat off despite the cold, staring down at the harbor like she could see the exact spot where this had all started. "I want to end her," she said without turning around. "I have the resources to make Marisol Calloway's name radioactive in every port on this coast by morning, and God help me, I want to." I know. I stood beside her, close enough to feel the cold coming off her skin. But if you do that, you become exactly what she's trying to paint you as. And I did not survive 431 days of keeping receipts just so the woman I love could throw them away to satisfy something ugly Marisol put in her the same night she put it in me. Dahlia turned to look at me, and whatever had been building in her, fury, old and banked and finally given permission, receded, slowly, at the sound of the word love landing between us for the first time from my mouth instead of hers. "You said love," she said quietly. "I did." I took her hand. "So did you, 6 days ago, with a bruise still forming on your shoulder." I meant to say it back. I'm saying it now instead. I love you, and I am not willing to let Marisol turn that into the reason you become someone I no longer recognize. We end this the right way. With the truth. Not with ruin for its own sake. She was quiet for a long moment, the harbor wind moving through her hair, and then she nodded once, the way a person nods when they've been handed the exact discipline they'd already known, somewhere underneath the fury that they needed. "The truth, then," she said. "But I want to be the one standing next to you when we deliver it." The board convened its full emergency session 48 hours later, and Marisol Calloway, informed that Ossery Holdings intended to address the allegations publicly, arrived early enough to claim a front-row seat, wearing the particular smile of a woman who believes she has already won. I stood at the front of the room in the same deep green dress I had worn to the gala, because some symbols are worth repeating on purpose, and I opened, for the first time in front of witnesses who mattered, the case I had spent 433 days building. "My name is Wren Ashford," I said. 18 months ago, I was accused of embezzling from my adoptive father's estate. I want to walk this board through exactly how that accusation was manufactured and by whom, using the same forensic method I would use on any fraud case, because the truth, unlike gossip, holds up under cross-referencing. I laid it out in order, the way I laid out everything, in red and blue ink projected across the boardroom's largest screen, Denny Ruiz's altered entries dated months before Augustin's death. The 41-day billing pattern matched across 3 Shell subcontractors. The wire transfers that traced transaction by transaction, directly to accounts controlled by Marisol Calloway. I played. At the precise moment the room's attention peaked, an audio recording Osai's team had obtained from a whistleblower inside Calloway's own accounting department. Marisol's voice, unmistakable, instructing Ruiz to backdate 3 entries before her father's funeral had even been scheduled. The room did not gasp, exactly. It did something quieter and more damning. It went entirely still, the particular stillness of powerful people recalculating, in real time, who they could no longer afford to be seen standing beside. "This is fabricated," Marisol said, too loudly, too fast. I don't know what fantasy this servant's daughter has constructed to worm her way into money she was never entitled to, but I will not sit here and— "You will sit," Dahlia said, standing beside me, voice carrying the particular calm of a woman who has already won and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. "Or you will be escorted out, Miss Calloway, and either way, the recording continues playing." She nodded once to Osai. It did. Denny Ruiz, seated 3 rows back and sweating through his collar, broke first. He stood, said he had documents, said he had been threatened with termination, and worse if he refused to falsify the entries, said he wanted immunity in exchange for full cooperation, and the room's attention swung to him with the particular hunger of an audience that has just found its second villain. By the time the session ended, Callaway Maritime and Textile's own board had voted 6-1 to remove Marisol from every operating position she held, pending a full independent audit, an audit that, 3 weeks later, would find not 18 months of fraud but nearly 6 years of it, all traceable to the same hand. I watched Marisol Calloway be walked out of a boardroom by 2 men who did not look at her the way the 2 men outside her house had once carried me down 11 marble steps, without looking at me either, and I felt, for one unguarded second, the pull of something ugly and satisfied, and entirely human. Dahlia's hand found mine under the table. Steady, and I let the ugly feeling pass through me instead of settling, because Osei was right about one thing above all others: I keep receipts. I do not need revenge on top of them. The criminal case moved fast once the board's audit went public. Marisol Calloway was indicted on 11 counts of fraud and evidence tampering within the month. Denny Ruiz took his immunity deal and testified against her in exchange for probation, and Petra Lindvist, the housekeeper who had spent 19 years finding small ways to remind me I did not belong in the house I scrubbed floors in, was quietly dismissed from the new ownership's staff once 3 former employees came forward, describing the way she treated the household's only Omega child. None of it unhappened the rain on those 11 steps. All of it, together, finally balanced the ledger I had been keeping since I was 7 years old. Ossery Holdings, through a controlling interest built patiently over 440 days, became majority owner of Callaway Maritime and Textile in the same week Marisol's indictment was unsealed. I sat in what had once been Augustin Callaway's office, now mine by a title no one could strip from me a second time, and I found, in the bottom drawer of the desk, wrapped in a handkerchief that still smelled faintly of my mother's cedar sewing box, my brass thimble, recovered, I would learn, from a storm drain, by an ossuary driver Dahlia had quietly dispatched the same rainy night I'd lost it. On the small chance it might someday matter to me. It had been sitting in a locked drawer of her own desk for 440 days before she'd had it moved to mine, waiting for a moment she trusted enough to give it back. "You kept this," I said, when I found her later that evening on the terrace, where all our real conversations seemed to happen. "I keep everything that matters." She turned, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen there before. Not the vault's careful stillness, but something unguarded and slightly nervous, an expression that looked almost out of place on a woman who had spent 11 years being feared by everyone in this city except me. She reached into her coat and produced a small box, the kind that makes a person's whole chest go tight on sight. I told you once that I don't do sentiment as a business model. I want you to know that everything about this is personal. Dahlia, ask me with your words, she said, echoing the terrace, echoing the parking structure, echoing every gate she had ever asked me to open for her honestly, instead of taking it by force, if you'll marry me. I need to hear you say yes, because I have spent my whole life taking what I wanted, and I refuse to take this. Yes, I said, before she'd even fully opened the box, because some answers do not require negotiation. Yes, I'll marry you. She kissed me on that terrace with the whole vindicated port spread out beneath us, and her scent went warm all the way through. Black pepper and wet slate giving way underneath to something I finally had a word for. Now that I'd smelled it enough times to know it by heart, home. We were bonded on a clear morning 6 weeks later, in the garden behind the Ossery estate, in front of 40 people instead of 400, because we had both decided, without needing to discuss it, that the parts of our lives worth having were the small ones. Osai stood as witness, and when the officiant asked if anyone present could speak to the character of either party, she stepped forward without waiting to be asked twice. I have worked for Dahlia Voss for 16 years, Osai said. In that time, I have never once seen her wait for anyone, defer to anyone, or admit she needed anyone. I have watched her, this year, do all three, for the same woman, repeatedly, without complaint. If that isn't proof enough for this room, I don't know what would be. Dahlia's vows were short, the way everything true about her had always been short. You once asked me why, she said, holding both my hands, her voice for once entirely unguarded in front of a crowd, why I bought your debt, why I sat still through a $14 million fraud you found before my own legal team could, why I loved you before I understood what loving anyone honestly even looked like. The answer is the same every time. You keep receipts. So do I. And every single one of mine, from the very first day, says the same thing. I choose you. I will keep choosing you, every day, for as long as you'll have me. The bite, when it came that night, was preceded by the same question it had always been preceded by, quiet and certain against my throat. Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop, I said, and meant it entirely, and the bond settled into me like something finally finding the shape it had always been meant to take. A year passed the way years do, when a life has finally stopped bracing for the next blow. Callaway Maritime, restructured and renamed, now funded a scholarship in Elena Ashford's name for the children of the port's dockworkers and seamstresses, the people whose labor had built the empire without ever once being asked their names. Marisol served the first 18 months of a 4-year sentence before the story faded from the financial papers entirely, replaced, as these things always are, by someone else's scandal. Josie Marlowe took a job at Ossery Holdings' Forensic Division, on my personal recommendation, and brought her particular gift for finding the joke in any room, straight through the front doors of a building that had once had no sign on the street at all, which I have always believed did the place some good. I still keep my mother's thimble on a new chain, one that will not break the same way twice, and some mornings I catch Dahlia watching me turn it over in my fingers at my desk, the same drawer where she once hid it for 440 days, waiting for a version of trust neither of us had been ready for yet. On the anniversary of the night it all began, we do not mark it with anything solemn. We sit on the same terrace where she first told me she loved me, and I make the tea myself now, chamomile, too much honey, and she drinks it anyway, every time, because that is what love looks like once it has stopped being an argument and started being a habit. The morning light comes through the terrace windows, the same soft gold every day now. Catching the ring on my hand and the thimble at my throat, two small pieces of metal that once meant everything I had lost and now mean simply everything I kept. I was the girl thrown down 11 marble steps into the rain because someone decided invisible was safer than seen. I became, instead, the woman who held the deed to every door that had ever closed on her and chose, in the end, to open them rather than lock anyone else outside. Being unseen was never a verdict on my worth. It was only ever a failure of the people too small to look properly. The end. If this story found something true in you, that quiet ache of being overlooked and the fierce relief of finally being chosen, stay a while longer. Subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Because there's always another woman out there discovering she was never as invisible as they made her feel. I'd love to know, what's the one small object in your own life you'd never let anyone take from you, the way Ren held on to that thimble? Tell me in the comments. Until the next story, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon.